Welcome to today's CRM Magazine web event, brought to you by Transversal. I'm David Myron, Editorial Director of CRM Magazine, and I'll be the moderator for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is about a very interesting topic. It's entitled, The Number One Reason Your Customers Leave. Before we start, allow me to explain how you can participate in the live broadcast. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been answered during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Now, let's introduce our speakers for today's event. Chris Hall is the Chief Marketing Officer at Transversal, and Esteban Kolksy is the Principal and Founder of ThinkJar. To review the speakers' bios, please click on the speaker icon on the bottom of the console. Now, without further ado, let's hand the event over to Chris Hall, Chief Marketing Officer at Transversal. Welcome to the broadcast, Chris.
Thank you, David, and thank you for everyone for attending today. I thought we'd start off pretty hard and heavy in regards to giving you the answer to the number one reason your customers leave. As a marketer and also kind of a person that's in the CRM space, what I care about most is market research and what customers care about. I've been in the customer service space for about 25 years, both on the provider side and also on the vendor side. And one of the tools that I use to kind of gauge what's happening in the industry is a global pulse survey that Accenture puts out every year. And I'm giving you an example on the screen today. And what they have come up with is a survey of over 2,000 customers worldwide talking about their biggest frustrations around working with their different suppliers or being a customer of suppliers. And year over year, what I'm seeing is the number one issue, if you see on the top of the graph here, their number one issue with customers, what frustrates customers most, consumers worldwide, is resolving my issue with first contact. On top of that, consumers say that vendors can do something about this, that they actually believe that vendors can do something about resolving that issue, so much so that they pretty much vote with their feet. So what's coming up year over year, as I advance to the next slide, you're going to see it's not just happening in 2012. This has been going on since 2009 when Accenture first came out with their report, that customers needing answers or demanding answers, whether it's on first contact or whether it's talking to an agent to begin with, it's consistently the number one answer or number two answer for the past 5 years. I think what was most interesting this year is that they actually quantified that, and to the point where if you look at what Accenture quantifies that to be, that not giving answers to your customers makes your customers leave, that equates to about a $5.9 trillion up for grabs money in customer service. In North America, that's about $1.5 trillion, and in Western Europe, that's $1 trillion. So this is actually a huge problem, and the funny thing is, not funny, but the sad thing is, year over year, the same problem shows up. Customers just want answers. So before I get too far down this, what I thought I would do is turn it over to a gentleman I've worked with for the last 15 years and say, Esteban, this problem has not gone away. Why are companies so poor at delivering answers?
Well, thanks, Chris, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I may be having some technology issues, so I'm going to try to move a slide, and if it doesn't work, I'll ask you guys to move forward for me. But, I can't see what's on screen, but if you can go to the first of my slides, which I think is number 6, what I want to tell you is, pretty much things that I found as I've been researching this topic. I've been working on customer service and knowledge management. I've been working on technology for a very long time, and I have a lot of information. I have a lot of data, and I want to narrow this down to the real 3 things that you need to worry about. The reason your customers leave, what you can do about it, and how you can fix it. And then the reason number 1 customers leave is because companies fail to deliver answers. Customers don't want relationships. Customers don't want interactions. Customers don't want engagement. Customers want answers. They go to a website, they call a phone number, they go on a chat session, they go to Twitter because they want an answer. Even if the company fails to deliver the answer, then that's going to be an issue for the customer. But if you turn that around and you look at it from the customer perspective, from the company perspective, the problem that they have is that the questions are not understood. There's many ways to ask a question. There's many things that could be said. But more important than that, if you can go to the next slide, please. More important than that is the fact that, what we are looking when we are looking at and understanding a question, we take only one portion of it. There's three parts to a question. There's the content itself, which is what we usually use a search for. There's an expanded part of the content, which is the context itself, and then that's the intent. Content is the question itself. Context is the situation in which you're asking it. I'm asking for a balance, and then I'm on a banking website. More than likely, I'm asking for the balance for my banking accounts. Now, the third part, the intent, is why am I asking for the balance? If I don't know that, I cannot give you the right information. If I don't know that, I cannot give you the right answer. If you go to the next slide, but it's something that we've been dealing with in knowledge management and customer service and automating all these things for a very, very long time. And I know that, Chris, on your next slides, you have a little bit more detail on that, right?
I do, Esteban. So, there's nothing worse than being able to not give consistent answers to customers, but you hit the nail on the head. In order to give a really good answer, you have to understand the question first. So what I want to take you through is understanding that determining the true intent of a question takes a certain degree of cognitive processing. Now, I know those are kind of some big terms there, but I'm going to take you to people on the phone or people on the webinar here, I'm going to take you through a visual journey of what I mean by that. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to say the question itself. I'm going to let you read what's on the screen. And it's a pretty vague question, but as you're sitting there envisioning what this question is, I want you to kind of envision what you think the question is, a visual interpretation of what you think the question on the screen is. And I bet half of the people in the room are envisioning the following. So if I basically asked you what kind of apple is number 8, you'd probably say Red Delicious. If I said number 4, you might say Macintosh. I'm not showing my apple dissertation prowess on what I think my apples are, but there's probably some reason as to why you envision this, some cognitive reason. And it's probably because you're either living in an area of the geography where people are actually picking apples this time of year, or maybe a week late, or you just went grocery shopping recently or had lunch recently and had an apple, but there's a reason why you visualize what I'm showing on the screen. Conversely, those that didn't visualize this may have visualized this because you have an Apple technology in front of you, or you possibly work for a technology company and you think in technology all the time. But a very simple question came up with 2 different visual meanings as an example, and I know it's vague, but could you imagine in the business you are today with difficult questions, this is exactly what's happening between customers and providers of service. So on the left, as a customer might ask a very vague question, you would expect Google to return 400 million results, and thank God it came back in less than a half a second. But on the right, to an agent trying to search for a customer's problem they're not quite sure with to begin with, you can imagine that they're not coming back with any documents whatsoever. And we've met many people over the years that have used knowledge systems where it's funny that they have training seminars on how to search. Search should just intrinsically return what you have back. So the reason why I took you down that is because it is really hard. It's not easy to determine people's questions. No 2 people ask the same question in the same way. Customers with difficulties understanding their problem, you can imagine, also have difficulties asking the right questions. And I think anyone that's worked behind the phones can identify with what I'm saying here. Many words and phrases that people often use, like the last example, mean 2 totally different things. Or sometimes the initial question, as an example, the one I just gave you, is kind of too vague to know where to begin. So it really comes down to how do you even begin to research the answer when the real meaning to the inquiry is still in question. And most of us that have been in customer service, and I spent many of my years on the phone, mastering the art of understanding customer questions really take years of experience. So how do we accelerate that? That's kind of at the heart of what we do at Transversal, and that's why we developed what we call Prescience, the name for our technology platform, our underlying knowledge cloud platform that truly understands what people search for, makes it simple and easy for them to find help, and really anticipates what they need next. In the next few slides, I'm going to give you some examples of the technology that actually help this situation out. The first technology we have is our memory engine. At the core of what we do is intelligent search and retrieval. Off to the left-hand side is kind of visual mapping of what you might have done in your head when I first put up that question. And that's exactly what the memory engine at Transversal is doing. It's a patent machine intelligence technology that understands not only the natural language of what you said, but how those words relate to each other. On top of that, when we go to implement at client sites, we put an industry library. So if you're in the food business, we'd put a food industry library in, and Apple would make sense of dessert and fruit. But if you're in a technology environment, we would put our technology library in, and we'd understand that Apple and Macintosh all mean different types of technologies. That way, we're leveraging a lot of the terminology and the connections that you would do cognitively to deliver the most appropriate result. And then through repeated use, our memory engine even gets better for learning and user feedback. The next technology, which is kind of the most interesting technology and where a lot of technologies fail, is sometimes the best answer to a question is kind of another question. So it's interactive dialogues. It kind of removes the guesswork by providing a simple wizard. So we have decision trees that will provide that kind of dialogue back and forth to either consumers or agents to kind of get to the heart of the question better and then and interpret a better result coming back. Subject matter experts can configure these drag-and-drop processes to really determine. I know when I was in tech support, the best thing is to make sure that you always went through your procedures over and over again in a systematic way, and that was kind of your goal here, and it's the goal here too. Now, I know you have a lot of love for decision trees, Esteban. Do you have any comments on this so far?
Here's the problem. Decision trees have been around for a long time, and I'm going to guess that virtually everybody on the call that has been involved with knowledge management has done it, right? And I will confess I'm not the biggest fan, and you know, without touting any technology in particular, including Transversal. I know that the biggest problem we always had with decision trees has been maintenance, but one of the biggest things that happened in the last few years, virtually across decision trees, is two things. Number one, they have become more dynamic, so they can actually, you don't have to create a static decision tree. You can create a dynamic decision tree that changes as the situation changes. But number two, the maintenance becomes a lot easier, and I think that's the key to using decision trees today. Is not only the fact that including your product or whether you guys do it the right way or the wrong way, but decision trees are changing dramatically, and we need to understand that. I mean, in the companies that I work with, in the clients that I work with, I mean, if you follow the adoption of decision trees, we had about 10, 15, maybe 17% adoption of decision trees at the peak of this latest iteration somewhere in the early 2000s, and it dropped to like 2-3%, but we're starting to see a rise. We're about 5-6% adoption, and I attribute that rise to the fact that we can use dynamic decision trees. We have reduced dramatically the maintenance. So even though when you say decision trees, people go like, oh my God, I'm not going to do that again. I would encourage everybody in the call to actually look into decision trees one way or the other as a solution to some of the problems that you have.
That's great feedback, Esteban, and we see the same thing too. But again, for us, it's kind of an option. The decision tree comes back as a piece of content. So if you asked a very vague question, it will be very interesting for you to be clicking on a question that would ask you back. So for instance, if I said, what kind of apple is this, I would say, are you talking about apples? Are you talking about computers? Or are you talking about fruit? It will be a very conversational dialogue at its very core. The other thing that we found very interesting is when you get really good at answering questions, you're going to get more. So the other thing we wanted to do is make sure that we anticipated the next question coming across. I know related questions, if you look at the bottom left-hand side, most of you are saying, I already have that in my knowledge base today. This is something totally different. This is all self-learning programmatically. We anticipate what customers will likely add next. We're dynamically recommending the articles and links based upon what you originally searched for and what you're going on the path for. The difference being is that we're not asking you to go into a knowledge base, create a knowledge base, and then create linked articles to that. We're taking care of all that for you. Kind of what you talked about before, Esteban, is making it a lot easier to maintenance. We're doing all the linking for you, eliminating all the time-consuming administration of the knowledge base linking and ranking. That kind of covers it for, I think, the high-level question on understanding the customer's questions first, but I know there are other things that companies fail at, Esteban, and I'll turn it back to you to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so the second part is not as much as understanding. I mean, let's assume for a second that you were able to understand, right? You were able to use better, more advanced technologies. You use natural language processing. You figure the context a little bit better, maybe some of the intent using some of these technologies, and you understand the question. But the second part is not only understanding the question, but finding the right answer. And this is the part that actually, when it comes to knowledge management and when it comes to satisfying customers, is the hardest part. I mean, mean, if you go into Google and you type an inquiry of anything, you're going to get more than likely millions of answers. And the problem is not getting the millions of answers, but finding the number one or the top three answers that actually correspond to what you're looking for. And we looked at this in many different ways. In 2011, the Journal of Knowledge Management actually ran a study and looked at agents and how long they took finding the right answer, and they estimated, they deduced that like 28% of the time of the agent time in any given day is spent looking for the right answer, not looking for the information, but looking for the right answer, which means that they go into the tools, they whether it's predictive and like gives them some potential links or whatever, then they try to find the right answer. And that's 28% of the information. And on top of that, 20% of the time, and this was a study done by McKinsey that was published last year, 20% of the time that the agents, 20% of the time of knowledge workers' time is spent trying to find information that cannot be found. And this is a significant problem. This is one of the biggest problems that we have, because when you look at KM, the biggest problem we have is not whether we have the information somewhere, whether we know the information, but how do we actually get to find it? And organizing KM, organizing the knowledge, is one of the biggest problems. These stats that you have in front of you come from research that I've done through the last couple of years. And for example, 39% of companies have multiple repositories, which means that there's not only one central source of information, but the information could come from anywhere. Now, if we are talking about companies that also have partners or suppliers, or they have knowledge that comes from the outside, imagine, for example, a Microsoft that works with many different vendors, or a printer that works with many different operating systems. If you have some situation like that, it becomes even more complicated to have a single repository to actually manage them. 20% of the organizations that I deal with have no formal knowledge management in place, which means that all the information exists somewhere potentially, but they have no way to aggregate it, no way to organize it, no way to actually find it at any given time. And 6% of the organizations use a search engine on disorganized content, which basically is the equivalent of actually doing a Google search on everything that your company has about every product, every service, everything that you ever produce. And this becomes an issue because if you remember what we were talking about earlier, right? I mean, you get millions of results. You may not get millions, but you get thousands of results. So how do you actually make this work if you have all these many repositories, all these many places, if you have a disorganized model? And the first thing that I found out, this I've been working on with many clients in the last few years, in the last 2 or 3 years, it's like, creating a federated model of knowledge management, it's the way to go. It doesn't matter where the knowledge resides. It doesn't matter, who owns it or who maintains it. It doesn't matter if it's in a community, if it's on Facebook, if it's on Twitter, if it's in an online community, on a website as content. It doesn't matter where the knowledge is. Finding a way to manage each piece of knowledge where it resides, and then federating all that into a common model. That's the model that's the way that most of my clients are actually starting to organize the knowledge better to get what they need and to get a better perception of where they're going for. So as you start going through the concept of not finding the right answer because you don't know where it is, start looking at where your data resides. Start looking at where your knowledge resides and how you can actually aggregate all this into a central model, and then implement the federated data management model that is knowledge management model that is going to give you more of what you want. But Chris, again, I think that you have some of your findings of working with your clients that you can share.
Yeah, we certainly do. So we also care about making knowledge easy to find, and we kind of take it to an Uber level, Esteban. We set out with a goal much higher than making knowledge easy to find. We believe knowledge has to be a service, an intelligent service that is not only convenient but effortless and then also dynamically aware. And when we did that, we said, we're going to organize ourselves as a company to really be kind of the plug-in knowledge as a service solution on the market. And if we do that, we have to make sure that it's convenient and effortless process for not only customers, employees, partners, but also IT systems. And that we knew that knowledge as a service needs to be readily available across all delivery channels, because we were running into customers that had e-service apps with one vendor, contact center apps with another vendor, HR and ERP apps with another vendor, and we're like, well, the whole customer master record thing years ago, centralizing that was important. Now it should all be about intelligence. Centralize the intelligence and how you communicate, and the information you communicate should be centralized as well. You could make it federated, and I think it all depends upon, as an organization, whether you're going to regionally, based upon the products that you serve, have a regional distributed knowledge model, or have a consolidated centralized, organized. I'll leave that up. There's no right answer either way. But as long as you take it serious and as long as you aggregate it in a few spots and know where the knowledge has been controlled. But lastly, that we wanted to make sure, especially on the agent side, that it was contextually aware. I think one of the questions coming up is how do you make self-service a little bit smarter, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit, but mostly as we make knowledge contextually aware for the agents, it's sitting inside an app that already has information about the customer. So we should also do that disambiguation of what we talked about earlier, that cognitive processing. If I have information from an experience standpoint of what products you own, I should be able to drive to the right answer. So I'll take you down a few technologies that we're doing. First of all, is how do we make knowledge easy to find? Well, let's talk about the customer journey. That seems to be a hot topic lately, and we do nothing about that, but what we do is say customers are going to go to Google to find information. So when we store public knowledge, we want to make sure that we store it with the latest SEO techniques and make it conveniently available to any search engine. This makes it readily available for most of our customers, whether they go through Google or go through your website, that they'll find the knowledge that's stored in the knowledge base. Secondly, we also want to make sure that if customers are on a mobile device, that they can actually use mobile voice searches like Siri, Skyvy, Cortana, or S-Voice, because we are also natural language in storing that to be searched and indexed by natural language. It's a natural handshake for us to easily find information in this format. But we're also finding for retailers or industries where customer onboarding is pretty much essential, our public knowledge SEO is driving web traffic and driving it at a conservative rate by 18%. So we're actually driving, business to your website through the knowledge that's served through our knowledge SEO. Secondly, we have a very responsive design. So we wanted to make sure from a convenience standpoint, web self-service, whether it be consumers or whether it be employees or business partners in your organizations, can get information on tablets and on mobile phones. So we've adopted responsive design. So we have zero additional code or website maintenance needed to professionally deliver self-service across any device. We have the built-in voice-enabled search if you decide to turn it on, but we also have the ability of snapping in case you have your own mobile application or tablet application, so embedding knowledge directly into that application. And then the last piece that comes into play.
So one thing, if you don't mind,
no, go ahead, Esteban.
Responsive design. I mean, one of the critical aspects of today's life is mobile is becoming the go-to interface for everything, right? It's not a device that matters. The device doesn't matter whether it's a tablet or a smartphone or a sensor or a kiosk or whatever. But the interesting thing to understand is we have battled with justification issues for knowledge management for a very, very long time. We haven't been able to figure out how to justify knowledge management, what to do about knowledge management, and how to make it work. And one of the things that I had to realize is as more and more customers engaged through many more devices, you need to be able to put the knowledge into that device in a way that is seamless for the customer. So I've been a big advocate for the longest time of downloading knowledge bases, of downloading contextual knowledge bases into devices, so that when the device stops working or stops connecting, you have at least the basic information you need to reconnect and to troubleshoot and all that. But the thing about this is you need to be able, when you take on knowledge management, you need to understand, you need to be able to deliver on any device. It's not because of this model that they're using of responsive design or whatever you want to call it, but it's the fact that if you don't deliver through all the many devices, you're going to end up with a bigger problem that you have today for knowledge management.
I couldn't agree more. As a matter of fact, what's happening with TVs today. TVs aren't just a television anymore. It's another browser. It's another app for applications. And I remember talking to someone about selling knowledge into the car industry, saying, we haven't been hugely successful there, but if you look at how complex the car is getting with applications in the car these days. So we know that self-service and knowledge is going to get more and more pervasive with the different technologies and vehicles we're using today.
And actually, those are two great points, because if you look at a Tesla, right, Tesla Motors, the Tesla cars, if you've ever seen a Tesla car, you get in the car and you have this massive 17-inch vertical screen in the middle that has access to every single manual, every single piece of information, and Tesla uses that as a way to manage knowledge for the customer, because every time that they have something new, they download it automatically. You mentioned TVs. I recently bought a TV, and when I plug in my TV, I connect it to the internet, and the first thing they ask me is that, it tells me that there's a new manual that I should download it automatically, so I have all the information right there. So those are two great examples of non-traditional devices that you need to address.
Absolutely. And the last thing I talked about was kind of a Smart App API plugin, but we've taken it to a kind of an Uber level, as we know that we're going to have to snap into a lot of the desktop business applications that exist out there today. So we really wanted to make sure our Prescience technology you could leverage in any application. So we wanted to also make sure that our integrated solution would outperform the traditional CRM embedded knowledge solutions. As we've all known, most of the competitors in our space have at least been gobbled up by one or two of the vendors that exist out there today. We wanted to make sure that we outperform what's happening there. So we kind of strive for, if not zero-click, one-click access to agents, along with some personalization features so agents can really personalize how they access knowledge, whether they're a Tier 1 or Tier 2. The next thing kind of talks about what I talked about before, a lot of the cognitive processing. If we know information about you, as you have a case screen open or a chat script or an email content, we should be able to dynamically drive that knowledge suggestion without the agent even having to click. So as you're filling out a case record or a loan record, we'll drive the right policy and procedure. We'll drive what we think the appropriate solution should be based upon the case and the products you own. And it's not just a one-way API. It's a two-way API. So in case for your company that you need to attach the version of knowledge from an audit compliance perspective, or just simply send an email transcript after you've talked with the client, those are all available from an API perspective. Now I know, Esteban, we talked about kind of two things here. We talked about really understanding the question first and then making sure knowledge easy to find, but I know it doesn't end there. What else do you think is really impeding companies to deliver these answers?
Yeah, so there's a third problem that we had, right? I mean, the real reason that everybody's so poor at this is because it comes down to maintenance. Knowledge maintenance is not done well. Let me tell you a story. I've been telling this story for a long time, and people tell me, well, but that's not the case anymore. But I promise you that every single year I find a new company that I can actually go into and find this problem. And I'll tell you a couple of stories. Number one, there's a company that I work with that spent 6 months building a knowledge base for their agents. And they think that they didn't do at all. They didn't build any sort of maintenance into the process. They said, well, we'll deploy because we need to get, this up and running right away. And then as we go along, we'll figure out what to do for maintenance. And that was a horrible decision, because 6 months after they deployed, the knowledge base was completely outdated. It had no data they could use anymore. And then we went back after spending 6 months building it and an untold number of dollars into it. We went back to agents having sticky notes around their monitors, or having notes in notebooks on what the answers were that they were providing. That's one of the things about knowledge maintenance that you need to understand. It needs to be done from the beginning. But the second one, which is more interesting, is I got a client about a year ago who came in and said, we want to optimize our knowledge management. We have, I think the number was 18,000, but it really doesn't matter. Just put any number you want in front of thousands. We have about 18,000 articles that are perfectly indexed and categorized, and we have all this information. But more and more our agents cannot really find the information that they need, and we keep adding more articles, and they're just not getting the information they need. So then what we did is we actually carried a small experiment. I said, for the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, have your agents tally, put a check mark next to the article ID for each article that they use when they answer questions, which is the easiest way to see what's being used. I mean, we can go and look at the usage statistics, but really what agents are actually using to answer is not what comes up in a search that matters, right? So we did this, and what we found out is from the 18,000 plus or whatever number of articles they had, there were only about 13 articles that were being used. And this is because the maintenance was done improperly, which means they were not really looking at what was being used, but rather what was coming up on searches, and everything was coming up on searches because everything was indexed. Some of the things that you have to understand is, some of the data that I have from the research that I've done, only 34% of companies, 1/3 of companies, have proper maintenance for KM in place, either processes or tools or investment or anything like that. Less than 5% of the budget that you have is going to go towards KM maintenance, and less than 6% of companies have KM budgets. And this last statistic is the one that I want to talk to you a little bit more, because this is the most troubling. The fact that companies don't have budgets for KM, but KM gets reallocated from other places, that's one of the most troubling things that I found so far in managing this. And the reason is this. When you look at KM maintenance, the vast majority of the companies, 2/3 of the companies, they have it set up in a way that only certain people can access the knowledge base and update it. which means that that's fine. I would say, the usual number is 2 people, teams that actually manage the entire knowledge base. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But you have to have budgets so that those people have the right tools, those people have the right reporting structures, those people have the right access, and they have access to the right subject matter experts, so you can actually deal with with this in a certain way. So if you're going to put the money, if you're going to put the money into knowledge management, you got to understand that there's a bigger investment to be made in subject matter experts and people who know than in people that actually just know how to manage a knowledge base. But more than that is the budget allocation of people that have money allocated to KM. It's like 87% of companies plan to invest in KM, but the vast majority, going people that are actually going to invest, they're going to invest the same amount of money this year that they did last year, and so forth. But your KM continues to grow. It continues to change. Things rise on average 8% per year. But you invest in the same money or less money than you invested in the future. So you really don't want to get into this. You want to get into a point where, KM maintenance becomes your priority, and the information, you allocate the right budget. We're going to talk, when we get to the conclusions and the things you can do to fix this problem, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you follow the money. But if anything else, keep in mind that you want to make KM a budget line item, and you want to grow it appropriately. So, the changes that you need to make, the maintenance that you need to make, just the ability to keep it running and updated is going to be something that you consider when you do your budget. And Chris, I'll let you talk through the last few of the technical items, and then I know we get into the 4 items you can do to actually make this work and solve the problem. So I'm looking forward to that part, Chris.
Well, I'm not going to jump in just yet because I kind of want to take your last point a little bit further. Because I see it all the time too. In renewal contracts with customers over the past 20 years or so, how can I sustain the investment, the initial investment I have in KM for ongoing KM investments, because the need just gets bigger and bigger, whether it's across product line, whether it's across geography, or whether it's somewhere else in the organization. I want to go from my web self-service deployment on the web for customers to a self-service deployment for internal for employees or salespeople. I think the hardest part, because not only as a KM practitioner but also as a marketing person, comes down to ROI. And a lot of KM practitioners have a hard time justifying what the ROI is. Not so much on the agent side, because I think we're sharp enough to understand how we measure people. But the hard part is how we measure what I consider the transactions we take for granted, the deflection rates. And I think if we get, and that's something we're taking on as a vendor, how do we be able to create web SLAs, electronic SLAs, because that's not part of the executive agenda. I don't know of a VP of customer care or an executive in this industry that gets compensated on web SLAs. But you know what? It's an essential part of the overall ingredient, and curious as to your thoughts on that, Esteban.
It is. The SLAs are a funny thing because, once you put SLAs into place, you actually begin to really understand what your customers expect and what you can actually deliver to your customers. And that is the ballgame, right? This is basically what you're looking for. You're looking for a way to deliver to your customers exactly what they're looking for in the time frame that they're looking for. And that's what is very, very important to get into SLAs. But, having said that, right, SLAs is something that most people ignore. It's the same thing as training when you deploy a new system. These are things that you think, like, maintenance and training and SLAs, things that you think you can get along as you move forward. But shooting from the hip from SLAs doesn't work. You got to understand, what your customers' expectations are, what you can deliver, and how you can make those two things match so you can actually get it better together. And once you get the SLAs in place and you say, for example, I need to be able to deliver something in like 15 minutes or an hour and 2 hours or 5 hours or whatever, then you start seeing how maintenance becomes more critical, because if you only have 15 minutes to find the right piece of information, then you want to make sure that you have the right information in your knowledge base.
Couldn't agree more. So let me at least kind of high level give you an idea of what we're doing to at least make the maintenance side of it a little bit easier. And first of it's being brilliant at the basics, so I'll take you through what we're thinking. We think like a seasoned employee. We basically design our prescience technology to improve over time, like an employee would, to learn through repeated use of both successes and failures. But we've added something new, and it's coming up early next year, the ability to take this to a whole new level and proactively investigate what we believe you will need to know next. I know one of the biggest failures of a knowledge solution is the content just being stale, and it's not serving a Tier 2 or even a Tier 3 employee anymore. It's basically just the basic stuff that an employee would normally know, and it's there, and it just gets stale over time. But how do we bring that level of knowing what you really need to know next to a knowledge worker that gets really exciting for me. So the first thing I'll talk to you about is what we're doing in regards to advanced analytics. How do you measure and refine the day-to-day of what's going on with a knowledge solution? We've got a great daily administrator's dashboard that gives you real insight into the accuracy of how search is being performed on the web or in your contact center, the session usage on how long the session is being in play and whether we think it's a positive or negative interaction, and the effectiveness of how knowledge is in play in your environment. The second thing, if you drill down into the detailed reporting, we're giving knowledge workers some actionable feedback of where there are knowledge gaps or where knowledge refinement or where knowledge is getting stale. And then lastly, it's all about content and feedback. How do people perceive the content they're getting to keep up to date and accurate? The next generation of our analytics is going to get into some fun stuff around gamification. So one of our kind of core underlying themes at Transversal is not only making knowledge really easy to find, but make it compelling to share. If it's not as compelling to share as how people share information on Facebook, and no, Esteban, we go to dinner tonight, I'm not going to log where I'm going with you, but I don't know why people do that. But some of the stuff our R&D team are looking at deeply is to how to get that level of sharing at a knowledge level.
Yeah, and but Chris, since you talk about analytics, this is one of my pet peeves for using KM because what I find is like virtually everybody that I work with in KM has a very limited understanding of what are the right metrics and the right analytics you want to look into, right? And I find most of my clients looking into like how many articles did you provide for each answer, or how many articles came back on a search, or how many articles were actually used on a daily basis, or how many times you access the database. Even if you look at the vendors, and again, we've known each other for a long time, so you know that this is nothing against Transversal, but even if you look at the vendors, the way that the pricing happens to be for most KM systems, it favors the fact of counting the number of times that anything is accessed. It favors counting the number of articles that you're going to access. But that has nothing to do, we're talking about SLAs before. We talk about, finding the right information, having the right information. That has nothing to do with what you should be measuring. What you should be measuring is effectiveness. Did you deliver the right answer at the right time through the right place and, meeting the SLAs that you had that you were targeting? And if the answer is yes, then you're going to notice that it doesn't matter how many times you access the knowledge base, or how many articles you pulled up, or how many articles were available, or how many you improved on a month or whatever. What matters is like you were able to find that piece. So when you look at metrics and when you look at analytics and you look at how to actually deliver better value for the customer and meet the SLAs and all these things, you need to start changing the metrics and the way that you look at it. Average handle time, how long it takes to find something, how long was a search, how many articles came back, etc. That means absolutely nothing in the ultimate goal and the ultimate outcome of actually having a satisfied customer. So, you have to turn analytics around and make it into like what's the goal that you have here, which is not to find, as many as possible, but to find the right answer.
I couldn't agree with you more, although I may hold back on average handle time because that you have to have some level of baseline metrics there. But, so I will hold dear to you on that one. But I would say, to me, average handle time isn't half as important as first contact closure. Are we effective at our handling our customers? And those are the things in our next generation analytics that we're challenging ourselves to do. Is not because it's really difficult with a web transaction. It's not difficult with a web transaction from a survey to say to answer my question. You'd be pretty ignorant as an organization not to be able to say survey up, thumbs down. But it's the deductive stuff. It's all the subjective reasoning behind what do we think a positive transaction is in order to build a web SLA. If a web SLA is to deflect 20% of the calls to the contact center per month, how many are we handling? How many web interactions are we handling for a customer? Is it 20 million? If it's 20 million, that's huge costs to the contact center. With those type of metrics, with web SLAs, with real true customer satisfaction information that we're doing in our next generation applications, that gets huge. The next thing we wanted to measure, Esteban, was, as a knowledge worker, I'll certainly get inquiries coming in saying suggestions, knowledge suggestions, or whatnot, but those are only as good as the interactivity of your organization. We wanted to leverage some really cool stuff that's kind of social monitoring people are doing, but in a whole different light. We wanted to be able to give the knowledge worker insight as to what's coming next. So just like if you're in a call center, you have a reader board, and you probably have alerts to your pager, to your phone, to your smartphone saying, hey, we're at 80% SLA. We have issues here. And it gives you an opportunity to be able to make dynamic adjustments and react to that. But we don't do that around web self-service or electronic transactions. But we have all the data. So we decided to do is, hey, let's build in something we're calling a trend monitor. And let's be able to give insight to the knowledge worker what's happening so that you can spot early service escalation trends by configuring alerts across something like missed searches. And I'll explain that in a second, or hot email topics, or escalating social media trends, so that a knowledge worker is the first to know what service topics are trending, and you can insulate your support organization with the latest up-to-the-minute knowledge. And that's what we're going after. I always hated seeing some of the early social media stuff in the customer service space by saying, we're already at 80 SLA in our contact center, but let's put a monitor out that's going to grab stuff off of Facebook and Twitter and give someone a service case to react to that one. What made that one any more important than the one that's in the contact center? Like, didn't make sense to me. It's not like customer service is the Maytag repairman waiting for interactions to come in. We already can't handle the volume coming in. Why is service monitoring in that particular social media monitoring helping? But in this case, it made good sense to me. If we can give a knowledge worker a trend alert that something is happening around this particular topic, and I can create a piece of content, I'm insulating the rest of it. I'm acting, one person insulates hundreds, if not thousands, of agents. So why is this so neat? It's not like your typical social media monitoring tool where you have to know what you're looking for. As a matter of fact, we don't even know what to look for either. All you have to know is the sources you want to look at. And with our automatic configuration, some of our cognitive processing, what we're going to do is group those into themes. We know that all of these particular inquiries, searches, or emails coming in are of this theme. And when that theme hits a certain threshold, and you say whether it's 100, 1,000, or 10,000, we'll send you an alert that something is trending. This, to me, is giving the knowledge worker kind of the level 2, next level intelligence of what's hitting them next. Makes it real exciting for me to finally work for a company in the knowledge arena that's taking the next level of service tools, knowledge tools available.
Chris, the other thing about trend monitors that is very interesting, you don't need to go back, but just one more item to say, it's like with a trend monitor, maintenance becomes a breeze because now you actually see where you need to allocate the money for maintenance.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. And, to me, it's like all those electronic things that are hitting your organization, you don't have the same level of monitoring that you do for assisted stuff in your contact center. You may on the email, depending on what email solution you do, but for a knowledge worker to have that level of insight to know that these things are trending is pretty important. Whether you decide to blast it out as a service alert that's a reader board in your CRM system, or whether you just put it out on the web, that's pretty important. And this is just kind of scratching the surface. The other talks we've had is why not point this at a Lithium or a Jive, a community, and pull out the diamonds, pull out the trends that are happening there, and create kind of sanctioned knowledge from that. So there's a lot of exciting things that we're looking at in the areas of trend monitoring and social knowledge. So in summary, I just kind of want people to know, maybe this is the first time you're hearing the company Transversal, but this is not just another knowledge solution built for the cloud. It's not a platform you have to assemble with a team of people. It's a real knowledge solution for companies who are serious about connecting people to knowledge, whether it's delivering consistent information to your employees, providing accurate knowledge to your business partners, or in this particular theme of this webinar, delighting customers with answers to their questions. At Transversal, we believe there's a more innovative way for people to get good help. And if you have the same belief, we'd love to talk with you. Before we end the webinar session, Esteban, let's kind of bring it down to some lessons learned, because I know you have a lot over the years.
Yeah, so I know that we're coming up on the time that we get a shift to asking questions, and there's a few questions coming in that they're very, very interesting. So I want to get to that. But let's go through four lessons learned that would actually give you a lot of perspective, and we'll summarize what we'll be discussing, right? I mean, the first thing that you have to do is KM can be daunting, could be frustrating, could be something that you cannot find a justification, but it all comes down to just follow the money. We talked about budgeting before. If anything else, the only thing you can do to guarantee that your KM solution will perform as expected over the time is make it a budget line item. This is my number one lesson learned, and survey after survey. I've been doing surveys for 5 years around KM, and survey after survey, people have a hard time. 50% plus of our companies have a hard time justifying KM, and the biggest reason for that is they don't have it as a budget line item. So they start to reallocate money from other places, and they never have a consistent level of investment. And without a consistent level of investment, you're never going to make it work. Second part of follow the money, is how do you track the response that you use on a self-service side, the response that he provided to an agent, the response that he provided through a chat session, through an email. How do you track that to the bottom line? Make it part of the KPI. Don't just say we answered 25, 30, 40, 50,000 sessions in the last month, week, or year. Just say we answered these basic questions, and this is the financial impact that it had. Because we did this, we deflected, like as Chris was saying earlier, $2 million of costs, through the website. Because we did this, we had a customer that had a 5% rise in customer satisfaction, and that translates into 3% rise in revenue or whatever it is. So always, when you want to justify, when you want to understand, when you want to provide a solution, make it about financial situation, make it about finances, and then you will have a much easier time going through it. The second part is it's very funny, but whenever I go to organizations and I talk about knowledge management, immediately people just get really tense and nervous, and they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to mention knowledge management. But what's in a name? It could mean the difference between you succeeding and you actually failing at this, because knowledge management, it's been implemented in many different ways in many organizations for the last 50, 60 years. In 1961, the term knowledge management was created and invented, and ever since then, we have many technologies. But don't use the term knowledge management. Make it part of something else. Make it part of your experiences. Make it part of how you deliver. We talked about SLAs before. How you deliver on time. How do you comply with SLAs? Compliance, experiences. All these things will actually take a little bit of the bite out of knowledge management, and then also we make it that when people don't know what you're talking about when you present knowledge management as a solution, when people don't know what you're talking about, if they go and Google the term, they're not going to come back with a lot of negative reactions. The third thing that I learned the most, and this is basically Archimedes with the well-known adage, if you give me a lever and a point of a turn, I can move the world. Essentially, it's about leverage. Leverage or knowledge management in as many ways as you can. You may want to bring it in for customer service. You may want to bring it in for HR. You may want to bring it in for for your website, for WhatsApp service, for chat, it doesn't matter where you bring it in, but as soon as it's in and implemented, look for more ways to expand it. Look for ways to prove the value somewhere else. So as I was saying before, and follow the money, not only it's about doing one thing, but it's about doing more than one thing. Right? These are the things that you're actually looking for. How do you leverage knowledge management in many different ways? And then the final of the lessons learned, and then we're going to get into some of the questions that you submitted, it's baby steps. There's no way that you're going to go from not having anything to having a fully functional knowledge management system in any term of time. It's going to be iterative. It's going to be deploying and having some successes and failure along the way. It's about you taking the simple solutions first. For example, making a knowledge management, tap into a single repository to deliver information through a web interface, or giving the agents that are doing email replies access to a knowledge management so they can have specific policies that they can actually refer to on an organized manner, or taking all your knowledge and putting it into a federated model. These are things that are going to take one step after the other. You create one repository, you tap into one, you provide a solution, then you go into multiple channels, then you go into multiple repositories, then you go into multiple channels, multiple repositories, then you go into centralized knowledge management, federated knowledge management. But it's baby steps. It's taking one step before the next one and being able to do things in the proper way. So this is all the problems that we've been talking about today. This is basically the 4 lessons that I learned so far in the last 15 plus years of doing knowledge management on how you solve it. But also, I know that you submitted some great questions, and I know that we have questions we want to get to, and we have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to give it back at this point to David. And David, if you want to go through the questions.
All right. Thank you, Esteban, and thank you, Chris, for your presentation. We do have a few questions. I'd also like to remind our viewers that if you have a question, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll, as I stated earlier, try to answer all questions, but if your question has not been answered during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Okay, first question I have is, I'll pose this to you, Esteban, and Chris, feel free to jump in, but first question is, what are the top reasons that you believe KM projects fail?
How much time do we have? 10 minutes?
Yeah, we'll have to enter the lightning round.
Yeah, so let's try to answer that in a very, very short term. I think that we highlighted most of the problems here, but if anything else, what I found out in most projects that have failed is 2 things. Number one is lack of vision. You don't know where you're taking the project. You don't know what you want it to do. It sounds great when you say I want to be able to answer all the questions from a federated knowledge base, but that's not a goal that you have for the company. That's a design, imperative that you have for your solution. So, set up a goal. What are you trying to do? Chris mentioned earlier SLAs and web SLAs. Do I want to deflect calls from the web from the website? Do I want to make email responses faster? Do I want to create a virtual assistant or an intelligent assistant that can actually answer questions automatically through a chat session? What is your goal here? And then once you figure out the goal, then you can figure out what's the model of knowledge management that works best for you. Mentioned earlier, way earlier, about different technologies for search, right? Is it simple keyword searching the way you're going to go? Is it a natural language processing what you need to do? Are you going to use fuzzy logic? Are you going to use a combination of all those? Are you going to put a search box in your website, or are you going to make them navigate through a taxonomy, through a directory like Yahoo used to do in the early days of the Internet? So this is all the first thing is understand what your goal is and what are the best tools that you're going to get there. And number two, I hate to say this because this is the answer, this is like the go-to answer for everything, but make sure that you have management support. And I'm not talking about like the CEO of the company buying into this, but the person who's actually going to be in charge of it, whether it's the SVP of operations, the COO, the VP of customer care, the VP of experiences, marketing, doesn't matter who it is. Make sure that that person understands what's the value of KM, because as I said before, you need to make KM a budget line item to make it successful, and you're not going to do that without executive support for making it a budget line item. And once you have the support, once you understand the goal, then you're going to see how your investment is going to be much better aligned towards getting to what you need. Chris, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I'll take a product angle at that. So you talked about kind of what I consider the business angle at it, which I was going to say the exact same things as you said, but I'll take the product side of it. So, when I go to talk to clients, why am I replacing the solution? And first and foremost, search doesn't work. If you have basically a training program to teach your agents how to search for information, it just doesn't work. You shouldn't have to teach search. A 7-year-old could find something through Wikipedia pretty quickly through Google. You've got an issue with search to begin with. You've got an issue with your content storage. And talking about content storage, the second is content stale. It's not being updated. It's not being refreshed. It's not being taken serious. I don't have people that are challenged or have SLAs to put content in the system. And the third is pretty much the after effect of users outgrow the system. It's not useful anymore. It was useful in my first training days, but don't use it anymore. Companies that do take it serious have staff of people behind it. It all comes down to if good enough, answering your question is good enough, then so be it. But customers are complaining about getting answers. I would think it would be our number one agenda. Yeah,
and you talk about content stale, and actually, I think we touched that through maintenance, but that cannot be emphasized enough. Having the updating content is critical, and that brings a question that I'm not sure. I think I saw something coming in the questions that people were throwing in, but it brings the question of social networks and communities and subject matter experts and where they live today and how you can actually create better content, right? Because knowledge management is about having the right content in the right place at the right time, and to do that you need to have the right content, and brings the issue of social networks and communities and how do you integrate all that, and going back to the concept of baby steps, because I had this question asked and that I dealt with in the last few months very often. You cannot just jump into saying we're going to let people answer the questions in a community. You need to actually have a way to understand the goals, understand the budgeting, how you're going to make it work, how you're going to put it all together, and then you can jump into these things. So again, iterations, baby steps, but content is the critical aspect. I agree with you there.
All right, thanks. Chris, a question here for you. What are your thoughts about deflection during the online case or email submittal process? It used to be common to run a search before submittal, but now companies don't want to put an extra wall up for the customer.
There's two thoughts on that. I'm all for putting an extra wall up, and we've done a lot of studies with that. I used to work for one of the major email companies in the world, and if you so customers, when they search for their own information, use different terms and keywords. And I think someone also asked an interesting thing: why do customers have a bad time answering questions, or why do customers have a difficulty answering questions? When customers are online and what they search for are two totally different things than when they describe their problem in person, because they think they have to understand what's in there for content. So, and I know I do this, I fall this trap all the time. If I know I think my problem is an email problem, I'll put in email problems in iOS 6 instead of just stating my question. Because sometimes if you state your question properly to an agent, they'll take you down a different path. So we found doing a lot of analysis with customers on the web, how they search and troubleshoot their own problem is totally difficult, totally different than what they put in for a keyword when they're submitting their email. So I'm all for doing a second trap, especially if you have a high level of confidence. So if your system is smart enough to say if the confidence of the answer I'm getting back is 90% or greater, go ahead and put that trap in place. I say go for it.
And it's funny because, I mean, what you're talking about is the misconception that fewer steps lead to a better experience or a better interaction or more engagement or whatever. But going back to the statement that I made very early in the webinar, I mean, the University of Michigan ran a test, a few years ago, and they've been running it 2 or 3 years, and it's always the same results, which is like, they put customers in front of different ways to get help to the same questions, and then they introduce different levels of delay. So, for example, you can get an answer right away through the phone, or you can get an answer delayed through the phone but right away through email, or you can get an answer like right away through the web but like delayed through the phone and email or something like that. And then they monitor all this, and then they also ask them at the end what was the most satisfying thing. And the study keeps coming up year after year after year with the same answer. Customers don't want interactions, they don't want experiences, they want a solution, they want an answer. They want to know what they want to know when they want to know it. So going back to Chris's statement, this is one of the best practices that I've been endorsing for a very, very long time. It's like, if people put a keyword, if people put in incomplete search string, and you have tools that would actually make it better, put the word by all means, because people were looking for the answers. They didn't go to the website so they can get escalated to an agent. They went to the website so they can have an answer. So find a way to deliver the answer through email, through the website, like this question says. Find a way to deliver the answer right away, versus like changing a channel or kicking into a process or putting another workflow or something else in place. It's far easier to resolve the issue than to kick off a workflow that would actually lead to more frustration on the customer side.
All right, thank you both for that. Chris, there's another question here for you. Can you comment on why customers can't really ask a question properly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was in tech support when I first started out of college. Let me just take a simple example. That somebody would say, I got an error 6 in my program, and that's not a bad question. But the real question is, how did you get the error 6? So if they were searching for error 6 on the web way back in the 80s when I was doing tech support on the phone, they would have found anything from printer problems to software installation upgrade issues to BIOS problems. They wouldn't even know where to begin, and they shouldn't. So the real question is, the question was, I got an error 6 when I tripped over my power cord and my computer doesn't work anymore. Do they give you enough information? And then, depending upon what industry you're in, if you're dealing with retail customers, you're dealing with all levels of different technology of different people out there. Certainly if I was Cisco tax support supporting other Cisco people are going to ask the right questions for the most part. But if I'm on Apple Consumer Report and my mom had a problem upgrading iOS 6 or 8, I mean, you don't expect that they're going to ask you the right questions to what's happening. And I think for all of us dad or mom tech support people out there that support our families, darn well your kids never ask you the right questions when their phone's screwed up or their computer's locked up and running slow. So you just can never really, I mean, I think the funniest thing is, even one of our customers in the UK, that one of their biggest questions on their website is, what's the best time to get pregnant? Who would have thought that was a top question coming up from that perspective? So you just never know what people are going to ask you. But I think the sophistication of if you have an understanding of what your problem might be, you'll ask the question better. If you have no clue as to what your problem is, you're just going to be shooting in the dark. And I think that's why customers don't do a great job asking the right questions.
And I'll do the 30 seconds leading into the closure that you have coming up, David. But, I mean, the bottom line on that is, it's not that people don't know how to ask the right question. It's that people don't know how to put it into the three components that we highlighted earlier. It's not only the content, but the context and the intent that actually makes a difference, right? So if you provide context, like I tripped over my power cord and the computer went away and then came up with an error 6, it's different than getting an error 6. And if you put the intent, like, I was trying to do something and now I cannot do it, because I don't know, I need to drive my wife to the hospital because she's pregnant and she's about to deliver and I cannot find the keys and I want to this whatever it is. So put the intent, put the context, put the content, put it all together. Ask the question in that format, and then you will get a much better answer.
All right, thank you both for that. We are at the top of the hour, but I do want to slip one more question in there if you can answer in just a few seconds.
42.
Chris, what are the best prospects for KM?
Wow, that's probably the most global question I've ever heard asked. for me, it's anyone that has to deliver an answer to a customer. From a prospect perspective, when we look at markets for KM, first and foremost is customer care. But if you look at it, and if you're a product marketer out to your sales force, salespeople need KM. If you're in healthcare, if you're insurance, people just need information. The hard part is when you break outside of tech support and customer service, people cross over. What's the difference between KM and content management? And I'm going to lob that one over for Esteban because I think there's a simple answer to that. But that is the confusion of where you draw the line between when a knowledge solution is the right one and when a content solution is the right one.
We don't have enough time to go into that, but I think that you hit the nail on the head in one thing. People hear knowledge management, and the only thing that they think about is how do I manage the knowledge, and it's not about managing the knowledge; it's about delivering the knowledge, right? And that's when he says it's anybody who needs to deliver an answer to a customer. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have or how you store it, where it is, or anything like that. There's content, there's knowledge, there's data, there's everything that goes into creating the perfect answer. So it's not only about knowledge management, but it's about the delivery of the right answer or answer delivery or whatever 2 or 3 letter acronym you can come up with. It's about finding the right information at the right time in the right place and deliver it to the customer through the preferred method for them.
All right. Well, thank you both for that. We did go a little over, but we had a lot of great questions. I want to thank everyone who did ask the questions, and if we didn't get to answer them, we apologize, but someone will respond to them within a few days. I'd also like to thank our speakers, Chris Hall, Chief Marketing Officer at Transversal, and Esteban Kolksy, who is the principal and founder of ThinkJar. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, you can download it once the event is archived. And if you'd like to review this event or send it to a colleague, you can do so by using the same web address that you used for today's event. It will be archived for 90 days. Plus, as a courtesy, you'll receive an email tomorrow with the web address to view the archive. And just for participating in today's event, you can win this Apple TV. The winner will be announced on October 31st. Please visit www.destinationcrm.com to see if you're the winner. And if you stay on the console after the event closes out, you will automatically be directed to the Transversal's homepage. This concludes our broadcast. Thank you for joining us.